Good afternoon, everyone. So what to expect from this session then? Well, first of all, you're obviously going to find out what we mean by information lineage and how you can achieve that. You're going to hear from myself. I'm going to be talking about the digital DPIA product that was funded by the public sector and is empowering non-IG experts in the NHS and across the public sector and some private sector as well to construct their own DPIAs and ISAs. You're also going to hear from Ren from Inform You Solutions, who's going to explore the maintenance of information assurance register as well. So you'll say Ren Lemming, Managing Director of Inform You Solutions. He's going to be talking a little bit later on. But first of all, you have the pleasure of my company first, Leanne Hawkins. I'm Chief Operating Officer of Coalescent Limited, which is the organisation that has taken the digital DPIA and ISA product Dapian to market. So this slide here really sums up what you're going to hear from us today. It's kind of exploring the use of these two products and how they sort of work together and what we mean by information lineage. Starting off with Dapian then. Dapian was actually born out of a collaboration project in the public sector, which was led by a number of local authorities, hospital trusts, health and care partnerships, and some national bodies as well. So the likes of the ICO, Information Records Management Society, some training providers, and kind of representation from the NHS as well. Also worth saying that the product now is being used quite widely across the public sector, particularly in sort of hotspots across London and hospital trusts as well across Cheshire and Merseyside. So we started this project with a discovery phase, and we were looking at, well, what are the challenges that we're trying to solve when it comes to DPIAs and information sharing agreements. And generally, the challenges that we were trying to address were the wider business, general staff members, they're not aware of when they need to be doing these things, how important they are, and what type of documents they're supposed to be producing as part of this process. They're generally put off by the entire piece. It's complex, it uses complex language and is full of jargon. And there's a real lack of consistency, not just between from one organisation to another, but actually within a single organisation from one department to another. There are often very different templates, data captures and processes that need to be followed. So the aim here was to remove all of that complexity and introduce standardisation to this process, as well as sort of changing a bit of behavioural change here as well to help staff see these processes as an enabler to progress rather than a barrier. So we took all of those challenges and we built the resulting product, and I'm going to give you a demo of that next. But just before I do that, I wanted to cover off the different types of permissions that we have in this product. So if I start off with staff members, pretty self-explanatory. Your general staff cohort, they're able to complete screening questions, understand if they need a DPIA and what type of DPIA template would best suit their needs. They're then able to go on and complete those DPIA templates and kind of invite input from all sorts of other people, whether that's experts or other colleagues that have to contribute to the process, but just do it in a really collaborative way until they get to a point where they have that document kind of ready to submit for DPO review or onto signatory for sign off. So then we have signatories, that's designed to cover information asset owners or people with certain information governance expertise, anyone taking responsibility for sign off in these steps. We then have a role designated for our DPOs and our Caldecott guardians, anyone that's there to be making recommendations in this process. And then finally, we have third parties as well. This is a role that's intended for people that are outside of your organisation, that you want to provide access to specific elements so that they can contribute to the process, whether that's a neighbouring local authority you're working with or a partner organisation that you're working on a project with and you want them to collaborate on a DPIA with you, or whether it's a supplier that you want some information from. That's a set of permissions that we've allocated for them as well. So demo time, just bear with me whilst I pull up So this is the resulting product. It's entirely web-based. It's cloud-based software as a service, and this is the website that everyone would turn up to regardless of their role in the process. The only requirements on IT here are that you have access, or staff members have access to a modern browser as defined on gov.uk as being supported. Tells you a little bit about what the features and functions of the product are here as well, but you will find much more information on our website dapian.uk about what this product does. So I'm going to sign myself in as a general staff member. As you can see how I'm sort of landed on my dashboard. I do quite a lot of DPIAs in my job here. You'll see my activity and other sort of items that are due for review here. But what I want to do today is to start a new DPIA. So the first step in the process is that you're confirming your details, and now we are essentially naming our DPIA. So if we said that this one is in the Department of Adult Social Care, it's on the use of teams in adult social care, and the project description is something like use of teams to deliver care and support assessments, maybe. Who your project sponsor is, who your DPIA owner is, and your IG lead if you have one. So next step, we're then taken to our screening questions. I'm not going to propose that you need to read all of these questions and understand how this is all working. What I suggest, if you want to read these questions and what this all says, please do just get in touch afterwards. We're very happy to give you access to this to kind of scrutinise all of this stuff. So just give us a shout and we'll give you that free access. This is the first point in the process where we really heavily relied on our collaborating organisations to get these questions right, including input from the ICO here. And we introduced these standard 13 questions and removed as much of the complex language as we possibly could from this process. So wherever we felt like there was still needing a bit more explanation, we implemented these green text boxes, and that's us putting experts on the shoulders of non-experts to help them answer these yes and no questions appropriately. So I'm going to randomly go through these questions and answer yes and no, and it will give me a decision at the end. So in this particular case, based on the way that I've answered these questions, it is telling me that I do need to complete a DPIA. There's a full DPIA that's required, and there's also something about international data transfer here as well. If the solution had decided that I didn't need to do a DPIA, what it would do is it would suggest that I went off and had the conversation with my IG team to make sure that that was indeed the right decision. If it wasn't, I could still proceed and go on and do a DPIA anyway, but at this point this is telling me I do need to do one, so we will go off and do those. Bit of scene setting there telling me what is going to happen next in this process, and now I have essentially started this process of my DPIA. There's my screening questions. I could revisit them if I wanted to see what I said there, but what I'm really here to do is to complete my DPIA. So that's the one I'm going to do first, and then I'm going to select the person that I want to do this DPIA. For the purposes of this demo, I'm going to select me as the person that's doing this DPIA. And a bit of more scene setting there, and now we have this new thing in our list. It's a full DPIA. It has not been completed yet. It is assigned to me, so I need to go in and do that. So this is our standardised DPIA template. I'm just going to make this a little fraction bigger for you. And I'm going to complete this in sort of the shortest way possible. Again, you'll see examples of our green text boxes here everywhere. Again, that's us putting those expertise on the shoulder of non-experts. You'll also notice that the length of this form is actually relatively short in comparison to paper templates that we see. And the reason for that is that we've thought really carefully about the form design here. So when I answer no to this question, nothing changes. It's only at the point that I answer yes that this additional data capture is required. And by doing that, it just removes some of that kind of fear and complexity for users that aren't used to doing these sorts of things. So, as I said, please don't feel the need to kind of read all these questions at this point. I'm very happy for you to take away some demo access with you and do this in your own time. For now, I'm going to go through this template and get it completed so we can move on to the next step. At some point in the process, I'm going to get stuck. I'm not an IG expert. I don't really know what the answer to this question might be, so I'm going to go and ask for some help from someone else. I try to follow the guidance. I don't know what I'm supposed to answer, so I'm going to stop where I am, save my changes, and I'm going to go reassign it to someone else and ask for some help. The person I'm going to ask, let's see if we... So there's Ren, who you'll hear from later. I could assign it to Ren to give me some help, but actually I'm going to ask my information asset owner at this point. And I'm going to say to my information asset owner, can you help me with this? I could have asked them something specific, or, you know, what's this or that, but that's just a general question that I've asked my information asset owner, and you'll see here this conversation building over on the right hand side. Now, I'm not expecting this person to hang around in this platform waiting for me to ask them to do stuff. What is happening is the system is sending out these email notifications to these people saying, you've basically been asked to do something, here's what you've been asked to do, and here's the link to sign in to go and do that. So what I need to do is sign in with the information asset owner's account, and I can provide that support directly. So there's my information asset owner's account. You'll see I'm now signed in as the information asset owner. Following the link in the email would have got me there straight away, but I can also find the exact same task here. And I can see Leanne is doing a great job of completing her DPIA. She's got stuck, and I can support her by answering the question. So there's my answer to that question. That may well be all that my involvement is, and I would do the same process of stopping where I am and saving my changes and reassigning it back to Leanne to carry on. But the process is exactly the same. Leanne might then choose to go and ask a number of other people to contribute to this form, but for now we'll just carry on and get to the end. We are nearly there. Also, just to sort of point out, there are lots of areas in this form where we've really carefully thought about how we're structuring some of these answers. So whilst these are relatively standard in their content, what we have found is that by reordering these, you might normally see something like consent at the top of these lists. By changing that to something else that might be more appropriate, you just get the individual to think about these questions differently. And that's what we found in our kind of user testing, that those sorts of changes and that insight made a real difference to the quality of completion of these forms. Last step in the process then is coming up. And that is for us to identify our risks. So here we are, the last step of identifying our risks. What you see here is a manual data entry, but we are just about to release, we're not quite there yet, but it's coming very soon, is automated risk generation. So what that means is that the system will take what the user has entered in the form and will learn from that and proactively suggest a series of risks and mitigations that are sensible based on their response. So you might get 10 automated risks for you, and you can choose if you want to accept them or delete them or edit them, and then indeed add to them by adding your own manual risks, which is what we're doing here. We're following all the guidance we're being given and constructing our risks. So what's the likelihood of harm before mitigation, severity before mitigation, what's your mitigating action? Notice here we're not using the word mitigation, and that's another thing we found with our user testing, is lots of people did not understand that particular term. So by changing it to language such as reduce or eliminate the risk, it did mean that they were able to answer or give answers that were much more appropriate. Now I'm going to put the data in for that, and then after you've mitigated, what's the likelihood, what's the severity, and then you have your overall risk score there automatically generating on a 5x5 matrix. that can be overridden if you want, if you decided that should be a different score, but obviously that's automatically calculating in the first instance for you. You then add as many more risks and mitigations as you need to until your list is complete. So we'll say that we've been through that process start to finish. We've collaborated with whoever we need to. The information asset owners had a look. They're deciding if they want to sign this off or whether they want to send it on for DPO review. And we have set steps and processes in this product that support those particular chain of events. So we'll just submit that as for those next steps. For purposes of this demo, I'm going to stop there. We don't have a couple of hours, but as I said, if anyone wants to see how this works properly end to end and getting to a point where you go from your in progress DPIA to your fully signed off and sealed, reviewed by your DPIA, then I'm happy to walk you through that. We have exactly the same features in here, but focused at information sharing agreements as well. Pretty much identical in setup, but it's very much designed around being able to allow multiple organisations to kind of sign up to something. So that's a different set of features, an additional module to this product. So moving on to a couple more slides. List of features are there. Essentially, the entire ethos of this product is that it's been designed by IG experts, but it is focused at non-IG experts. We then wanted to talk to you a bit about what the business case was, and Coalescent didn't produce this business case. It was produced by the collaborating organisations. We thought that was a really important thing to do to make sure that they own and understand, are in control of what this business case is and does. So here we asked them, well, if you look at your analog processes, so sort of paper or email exchange when it comes to DPIAs, what's the sort of salary of the individual that is completing these DPIAs? And it's about at the 45k mark, and each individual is able to work about 1,680 hours a year, and on average they're doing just over 23 DPIAs in a year. So that gives them a cost of about just shy of £2,000 per DPIA. So, then we were looking at, well, introducing Dapian and what's the impact of doing that. Well, keeping all the parameters exactly the same. In reality, they aren't probably the same. Dapian is entirely focused at empowering non-IG experts, potentially at lower pay grade, possibly, to do this. We wanted to look at the worst case scenario, though. So this 45k mark may well be less if you're implementing Dapian and using it as it's intended to be. But for keeping things on a comparative level, keeping all of the other parameters the same, the number of DPIAs that an individual was able to do in a year was increased to sort of 65, and therefore the cost was sort of in the region of 700. So first slide minus second slide, essentially what the difference is between the two, it's about a 64% saving and £1,200 per DPIA. Pricing. We like to be really open and transparent about our pricing. We have two options here. We have an unlimited subscription, which covers you for unlimited number of DPIAs and unlimited number of users, and absolutely nothing else you would need on top of that. And the prices for that are split out for depending on whether you're a public sector or a private sector organisation. And then we have option 2 there, which is around us batching up 10 DPIAs and saying, look, for smaller organisations, we understand you might not do as many DPIAs in a year, or just the type of organisation you are, you don't do as many DPIAs a year, and therefore you could look to kind of do this in batches of DPIAs. So there's two options there in terms of pricing. We are offering, as a result of this webinar, a 15% discount on those prices. If that's of interest, you can use the discount code webinar 2021 on our website, and you are able to purchase any of those products via our website or come to us directly with that discount code, and we will process that in the same way for you as via our website. So implementation, what does that look like? It's software as a service, so essentially it's actually really easy for us to implement this with you. It takes about 3 days to complete, After those 3 days, you will have your instance of Dapian and you'll be able to roll it out with your organisation. We support you in doing that. We provide you with kind of packs of materials around how to onboard your staff and training, of course, and we can provide train-the-trainer events on top of that as well. So if you want to request your free access to the product, or you want a local briefing for your organisation, then you can do that via our website, dapian.uk, or my email address is leanne.hawkins@coalescent.uk as well, and we can get that arranged for you. So I'm now going to pass over to Ren.
Hi everyone, good afternoon. My name is Reynold, or Ren Lemming. Some of you may know me as the chair of the Information and Records Management Society, and wearing that hat, I was engaged in the process as one of a number of those stakeholders that Leanne mentioned in the development of the product. But today I'm wearing my day job hat, which is as Managing Director of InformU Solutions. So today was titled Information Lineage, and I want to start by exploring and explaining what we mean by that. Well, fundamentally, and this is like a dictionary definition of lineage, it's the ancestral line and pedigree of your information. So to me, information lineage is really about being able to prove that pedigree, so that you can say at any point in time in the life of information that you either hold now or have held at some stage in the past, you can evidence its use, its quality and its lawfulness, because you've got a record of its governance and handling, not just how you do it now, but also back in time. And what I'll be doing during the course of the next few slides is exploring why that's useful, what it means, and how to go about it. And just as a slight aside, because we've got that picture there on the left, if I was ever to write a book, and hopefully I will one day, exploring the lineage of information in our history, we'd start right back with the tally sticks that our prehistoric ancestors created. And what you see there is a baboon fibula called the Lobombo bone, found in a cave in Swaziland that is 37,000 years old, and as far as I know is the earliest data artifact on the archaeological record. And then we would sweep through that lineage right through to looking at the future, where to address big data, what we're going to see increasingly is all the noughts and ones of our data translated into the 4 letters on DNA strands, and DNA will be the storage medium of the future. So that's the definition. The next thing is what? What is it that this pedigree is all about? If Sherlock Holmes, who I often quote on a lot of my posts on LinkedIn, increasingly recently, for those that see them, if Sherlock Holmes, who was fascinated by evidence, and indeed his books are absolutely full of wonderful quotes about data, if he was in charge of our information governance, what would he go looking for? And that's what's in these bullets. Fundamentally, he'd want to say, does the record, does the information exist? If not, why not? Did we dispose of it defensibly? What record do we have of that disposition? And then looking at all the qualities and characteristics of that information, to check it's lawful, to check it's accurate, to check its integrity and authenticity, to check it's been protected, to check it's being used properly over time. Now the next question, therefore, is why? And I've broken why into 2 answers to that question. First of all, it's about the state and status of our information now. It's about us being accountable, it's about us being compliant, and it's about us being able to prove that compliance, which might be things like the records of processing activities and other records that we have to keep for GDPR and data protection compliance, which might be proving things like privacy and data protection by design and default, which of course the whole DPIA process is part of. It might be about saying these are the security measures that we have in place to protect information at the moment. These are the statutory roles that we have, and we can evidence the roles and job descriptions of people like the data protection officer. It might be proving that we handle properly the information rights requests we get, be these, for example, data protection subject access requests or freedom of information requests. It might be about proving that we are adhering with law, all that law that's out there that say you've got to keep these types of records for these periods of time, as well as regulatory obligations from record keeping from sector-specific governance and regulators. And it's also useful if we want to certify to standards or codes of practice in areas such as information security, data protection, or records management. So having that good picture of the governance and handling our information is very important for all these reasons on a day-to-day basis. However, there is also why part 2. Why part 2 is about being accountable and transparent over time. It's about saying that whether we look back 5 years, 10 years, 20 years, 30 years, or even longer, there are scenarios and there are interested parties who might want to look back over time. So if we look at the kind of public inquiries that often take place, the big ones recently around things like Grenfell, around things like contaminated blood, around things like historic children's abuse inquiries, these are looking back for the records from long ago, and they'll want to know if they're not there, why not? They'll want to know why they were produced, how they were governed and looked after back at that time as well. So the pedigree is inherently a historical thing. And there's lots of other people that might come knocking, wanting to look back in time at how information was handled. HMRC can have a long reach back. Certain limitation periods are quite long tail, so we might have to look back to justify our record keeping years ago for courts. Same with stock exchange investigations or journalist inquiries. Looking at things like insurance claims, we might have long tail insurance policies where actually we don't become aware of what we're claiming on and can't engage with the loss adjusters till many years after the event, and we want to look back again at what our records are or were at that time and what decisions were made around them. And then, of course, going into the future, historians, archivists, scientists, researchers, many, many, many years down the line will have an interest in how our information was handled. So all these things lead to the importance of assessing and maintaining our information pedigree. So the next slide is, well, how do we do that? Well, in the information governance world at the moment, an acronym IAR will often stand in people's minds for Information Asset Register. What I'm trying to do is change that slightly and promote that we now use the term IAR to stand for a far more wide-ranging Information Assurance Register. And what we see here, and we'll see in screenshots as we go through the rest of this presentation, and I wasn't brave enough, unlike Leanne, to do a live demo today. What we're seeing here are screenshots of InformU's Information Assurance Register solution, which contains, yes, information about information assets, but also a lot more as well. And what you see on the screen here is a slice of a report of what I might call a topic card. Topic very much being a word that will come into increasing use now that Microsoft has released Viva, but a topic card that says for a particular business process, what is the information and what are the governance entities around the handling of that information that correlate together. And this is just a slice. So for example, at the top, it says I've got a business process around handling supplier correspondence, and I've got a contract that's related to that. I've got a DPIA I've done that related to that. I've got assets that relate to that, and so on and so forth. So leading on from that, what is the pedigree evidence that I want to maintain within such an information assurance register? Fundamentally, it's going to be the business processes, which you sort of need to maintain information about to produce your ROPA, your records of processing activities, but for other reasons as well. It's going to be the record series or information assets that are part of those business processes. But it's also going to be a whole range of other things, such as the hardware and software that's been used over time to handle that information, and all the different aspects of governance, keeping a record of what applied when to that information, including retention policies, other types of policy. The DPIAs are being undertaken, the job descriptions of the statutory roles that were in place at the time, the contracts and agreements that were in place, etc. So I've now got a few more slides, each with a screen, which exemplify a few aspects of that. So we'll start with retention policies, where you want to retain information about your policy, what the policy is, what information sets that it applies to, how often you'll want information asset owners or information asset administrators based upon these policies to review that information, the business rationale and the legal citations that apply. But you'll want to go further as well, because as policies change, you want to be able to look back in the past and say, well, at that point in time, what was the policy that applied to that information set? Who authorized it? What was the scope of its application? How closely was it followed? When was it retired? On what authority? When did legal citations, etc., for it change? So it's not just about the here and now. It's about maintaining that history of retention governance over time. The next example is of business processes. So as part, for example, of generating our records of processing activity, there's a certain amount of information that Article 30 of the GDPR and certain aspects of the Data Protection Act 2018 require us to produce, and a number of those are to say at the level of the purpose of processing, shall we say, the business process level, this is information, but the ROPA as a whole obviously brings together asset level information as well. So recording information at the business process level is obviously important for your records of processing activity, but it's important anyway, because you might have processes that don't necessarily appear in the ROPA because they have more purely technical information, but you still want to assure the governance of those processes and record information about what those processes are as well in terms of your relationship to the process and the type of information handled. Another important aspect of it as well is the process is where you would capture and record the data flows, and data flow mapping is obviously a hugely useful approach and a useful tool to have. Then, of course, there's the information assets themselves, cataloging your physical records, your system data, your electronic content. And goodness me, obviously we all know that there's numerous things that you can ask of that information, both for compliance purposes, but also really useful management information purposes. So taking the example of physical records, it helps you know where they are, so you can see how much space has been taken up, what physical records you have to look for if you're doing an office sweep when you vacate a building, etc. And for electronic content, it can help you look for duplication and bottlenecks and things like that. And it's quite easy to sit down, I think, for an individual information asset and ask potentially up to 50 or 60 questions. And this system's entirely configurable, so you can ask as much or as little you like about your information assets, but you record information about the assets. But we go further as well, because if you look at the bottom left screen, once you've recorded an information asset, in many ways that is static, but business events will occur with relation to that asset over time. Chunks of it in the real world will be disposed of. Bits of it might be digitized and scanned. Chunks of it might be sent to offsite archive storage if it's physical. Chunks of it might be archived or migrated to a different system if it's digital. There might be occasional or frequent sharing business events, and all these things, it's important to record in an ongoing audit trail around the information asset, and the system enables you to do that as well. Another example is software systems. So electronic data sits in software, be that line of business applications or content management applications, and it's useful to maintain as part of this a register, not only so you can, for example, see what your software estate is and you can have the system nudge you if maintenance contracts are coming up for review, etc. You can look at your exposure to different suppliers, but also, again, looking at the pedigree going back in time, you can say this sort of data was in that system at that point in time, and then cross-reference that to any risks and issues, etc., that occurred with the use of that particular software. Similarly, there's equipment. So, for example, let's say you've got an information set that is containing scanned images. You'd want to know, as well as what system that sits in and what policies govern the capture process and legal admissibility, what equipment was used to capture that? What document scanners were in place at the time that this information set was digitized? And what were the testing regimes and what were the maintenance regimes? And all these things help prove over time the ongoing integrity and authenticity and trust in that information, all part of its pedigree. Another aspect is assessments, such as data protection impact assessments. And what we propose with the register is not reinventing the wheel. So there is a tool like Dapian, and we have a business relationship with Coalescent around Dapian that does the automation of the process. But at some stage, what we do is say, let's take a summary snapshot of the outcome of your DPIA, and let's put that in the system as part of that overall holistic view and holistic history of how a particular set of information was handled. And we'd capture the relevant parts of a DPIA process within this, the relevant bits of the outcome. Next is documentation. All that governance documentation that exists around the handling of information, policies, standards like retention schedules, procedures and guidance. So that again, it's about saying when something happened to a particular set of information, no matter what point in time, we know what governance was documented, we know the status of that documentation, we know its availability at the time, we know what documentation applied when and when it was retired, and ongoing we can look up and say, okay, we know we've got this bit of documentation in place, but where and how is it published? Where's the master copy for editing and the relationship between the two, etc., etc. So again, part of that holistic pedigree record is cataloguing in a single place the existence and scope and status of all your governance documentation. Risks, errors, adverse events, security incidents, near misses. Again, you'll have systems, specialist workflow systems probably, that would do the heavy lifting on actually automating the security incident process. So this, like DPIAs, is saying as part of my holistic picture, at some stage, perhaps at the closing of incidents, I want to take a snapshot of the outcome so that I can see that in place in the view of that information set and everything else around it. And the last example is that of contractual documentation. So you might have information sharing agreements where you're doing multi-agency working, or you might have data processing agreements with suppliers of services to you around the handling and processing of information. And again, part of the holistic picture, part of that pedigree is including the contracts that are in place. So again, going back in time, you can say when a decision was made about information and it involved a third party, under what terms was it governed at that time? Where's that contract now? When did that contract expire? What changes were there, etc. So it's not just about seeing what's in place now, but it's about being able to track and account for going back in time. Pricing. Try to be transparent here about pricing as well. Fundamentally, same as Dapian, there's a fixed annual fee. It's cloud-based. For that annual fee, you get unlimited user access, the right to use the software, integral support and maintenance. And broadly speaking, we price it on small, medium, large, although there's variances not only with the size of company, but also the nature of the organization as well. And for that cloud service, it starts therefore at 3,600 per year. And then there's two other options, 5,700 and 7,800. There will also at the start be a level of professional services, because some of the real heavy lifting is saying, well, where's that information now? Oh, goodness me, it's in those databases or in all those spreadsheets. We've got to package it up. We've got to help you migrate. We've got to configure the system to contain the fields that you specifically want. So it's not going to be a big number, but there is an element of professional services at the start as well to help with all those things, as well as, of course, producing bespoke documentation and training. So my end note, you have a picture there of buttons, all those kinds of things that you can add into the system, and a quote from me, which is that the ability to prove good practice over time in the use and handling of information is the sum of all aspects of how it was processed and governed. So I'm going to say thank you, and I'm going to stop sharing my screen.
Okie dokie. I was going to say I will answer those few questions that have come up in the channel since we've been talking. So the ones hit Ren, you got off lightly. Damn you.
Come on.
Okay, so a couple of questions here. If the screening questions say a DPIA isn't needed, and that's agreed with the IG team, is a record of that saved in the system? Yes, it is. So sorry, I've noticed you can see my dog in the back. Sorry about that. I can't move her at the moment. Yes, it is saved in the system. So if that decision to not proceed was based on the screening questions, that record is kept, and then obviously you didn't do one because those screening questions said you didn't need to do one. And one from Sonia as well. You said at the beginning of your presentation that one of the drivers for developing the product was that staff didn't know when they needed to complete a DPIA. What did you / partner organisations do to change that? So one of the biggest ways that we tackled that was those screening questions, and we just changed them from what you might traditionally have seen as screening questions to be much more user friendly and make sure that that was compliant and the ICA were happy with what we were saying. But also it was that Dapian as a product has been, the way that it's been rolled out within organisations is that as a new project has kind of come about, Dapian has then been slotted into that process as a tool that should be used right from the start to understand if they do need to complete one right at the beginning and then go on to do them from there. So it was very much an engagement piece, and some culture change in there as well. But having a tool that means that they aren't instantly going, I don't know, so I'm not going to do it, kind of helps that process happen easier than it might have done before. Then linked to that, how much training does the system require, does staff require to be able to use the system? So far we've run with all of the organisations that are using this, which is coming up to about the 20 mark now. It's about an hour to an hour and a half worth of training. In all honesty, we could probably shorten that down to about 30 minutes, but for completeness, training people to onboard users, which of course not every member in your organisation is going to be playing that role, but for those people that are onboarding users, as well as staff members being able to conduct DPIAs, as well as signatories being able to sign off DPIAs, as well as your DPOs being able to review them, all of that stuff can be sort of trained within about an hour and a half. And the reason that is actually a really short amount of time is because the system has been designed with users right at the centre. So for every minor and major release of the product, it was always put in front of end users first. So largely, quite a few of the organisations didn't require any training at all because the system handholds and it's very user friendly, so you can find your own way very easily. You'll find that if you ask for demo access to the product as you're using it, we probably don't need to have any more conversation about it. You will find your own way around it very easily. We obviously will support if you want any help there, but that's the intention, is that we built it in that way so that you didn't need masses of training to be able to use it. And then the last question here is, will the slides from the webinar be made available after the session? Absolutely. We will share the slides and the recording. If you ask us to do that, we'll send that over for you. Just give us a shout. So thank you very much, Ren. I'm just going to put up our contact details just one last time so they are there.
And thank you very much, everyone.
Great. Screen 2. And there we go. So yeah, either myself or Ren are available at both of those email addresses, as you see there, leanne.hawkins@coalescent.uk or reynold@informu-solutions.com. Lots of information on our websites, folks. Please do check that out, and please do link in with us on LinkedIn as well.
LinkedIn is actually where I publish a whole load of stuff. So on the InformU company page, there's usually new items every day on information governance and other news.
Right, thank you. We look forward to hearing from you guys. See you soon.
Thanks very much, everyone.
Cheers. Bye.
Bye.